This is TradeFlow News, bringing you relevant news and insights from around the world. TradeFlow News, enabling trade for SMEs and economies worldwide.
These are some of the key topics that we will be looking into in today's program.
First, let's take a look at the overnight headlines which are impacting the commodity markets.
The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries, OPEC, has received updated oil output compensation plans from 8 countries that have exceeded voluntary production quotas within the OPEC Plus group, it said on Wednesday. The countries are Saudi Arabia, Russia, Iraq, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Kazakhstan, Algeria and Oman.
Oil prices rose 1% on Wednesday, reversing early losses as the market took a bullish view on China's stance on potential trade talks with the United States, though gains were capped by continuing fears that the trade war will curb energy demand. Brent crude futures rose 64 cents to $65.31 a barrel by 0937 GMT, while US West Texas Intermediate crude rose 62 cents to $61.95. Prices declined in early trading, but analysts said momentum shifted after a Bloomberg report quoted an anonymous source as saying that China wants more respect from the Trump administration before it will agree to talks.
Moving on to the top news in the energy sector.
Indonesia awarded 5 oil and gas blocks to companies, its energy ministry said on Wednesday, as it attempts to replenish its oil and gas reserves and improve its energy security. Over the coming years, the government plans to offer nearly 60 oil and gas blocks to try to reverse a decade-long decline in output. The government hopes these auction winners will be able to contribute to Indonesia's energy security ahead, Tri Winarno, senior official at the Energy and Mineral Resources Ministry, said in an online broadcast on Wednesday's awards.
The U.S. government's energy statistics arm is set to lose dozens of employees after the Trump administration's latest round of resignation offers, putting at risk some of the most closely watched energy reports globally, 5 sources told Reuters. The U.S. Energy Information Administration publishes weekly, monthly and annual data that includes figures on oil and gas output, crude and fuel inventories, and price forecasts, all of which are used by traders and energy companies as indicators for future supply and demand, and which can move prices. One of the sources told Reuters that as many as 1/3 of the EIA's roughly 300 to 350 employees had left or had accepted buyouts since the start of the year. Other sources, including 3 employees of the EIA, said the departures amounted to dozens. Next, we have the top news in metal markets. U.S. President Donald Trump on Tuesday ordered a probe into potential new tariffs on all U.S. critical minerals imports, a major escalation in his dispute with global trade partners and an attempt to pressure industry leader China. The order lays bare what manufacturers, industry consultants, academics and others have long warned Washington about: that the U.S. is overly reliant on Beijing and others for processed versions of the minerals that power its entire economy. China is a top global producer of 30 of the 50 minerals considered critical by the U.S. Geological Survey, for example, and has been curtailing exports in recent months.
Iron ore futures prices slid on Wednesday, as a further escalation of trade tension between China and the United States heightened fears on demand outlook, while doubts mounted on stimulus prospects following a batch of upbeat Chinese data. The most traded September iron ore contract on China's Dalian Commodity Exchange recouped some earlier losses to end daytime trade 0.14% lower at 708 yuan a metric ton. The benchmark May iron ore on the Singapore Exchange slipped 1.28% to $97.45 a ton, as of 0717 GMT.
We will now look at the top news in the agricultural sector.
India's wheat stocks in government warehouses surged 57% to a 3-year high at the start of the new crop year this month, official data showed, easing supply concerns that drove domestic prices to an all-time peak earlier this year. Higher opening stocks will help the federal government tame any price spikes later this year, even if the Food Corporation of India, the state stockpiler, struggles to meet its domestic wheat procurement target. Wheat reserves in state granaries stood at 11.8 million metric tons on April 1, well above the government's target of 7.46 million tons, the data showed. That is all for today's news on commodity markets. Stay tuned to TradeFlow News as we continue to provide you with more updates. We also invite you to follow us on Twitter at TradeFlow News, which allows you to watch our program on your mobile device or desktop to receive information from there.